Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Michelle Berthollet. I'm the group publisher of agriculture at Annex Business Media, which is the parent company for Top Crop Manager, Canada's source for field crop production and agronomic insights. I'm joined today by Courtney McClinton, Agronomy Technical Services Manager for Western Canada, and Dan Tullson, Product Lead, both joining us from the ICL Growing Solutions team. Today, our presenters will discuss nutrient removal, focusing on sulfur's role in soil fertility, crop performance, and grower profitability. Special thanks to ICL for sponsoring today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all attendees and registrants approximately 24 hours after the live broadcast. The session is scheduled to run for approximately 45 to 60 minutes, and following the presentation, we'll open the floor for questions. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them into the Q&A tab found on the panel along the bottom of your screen. This webinar has been approved for one CCA CEU in nutrient management, and further instructions for submission via QR code or by email will be addressed after the question and answer period. So without further ado, over to you, Courtney and Dan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Just a quick overview. My name is Dan Tullson. I'm the product lead for ICL on our Fertilizer Plus portfolio. A little bit of background. I grew up on a farm in western Minnesota. Parents own and operate a fertilizer plant out there, and grew up growing corn and soybeans and a little bit of wheat. So I've been in agriculture my entire life. Been in the fertilizer space specifically for about 15 years post-college. So fertilizer is a passion of mine, and excited to be here today.
And I'm Courtney McClinton. I am the agronomy manager for Western Canada. I grew up on a small farm outside of Saskatoon, about 2 hours. Small pedigreed seed farm there, and went to school at the University of Saskatchewan. So definitely a prairie girl at heart. Whenever I think of bringing new innovative solutions to farmers, I always think of, what could help out my dad on the farm. So, I love the industry and excited to share some great information with you guys today.
Excellent. So just a little bit of our agenda that we want to talk about today. We want to highlight specifically on sulfur deficiencies, and then just some agronomic and economic tools that we can use to help address those issues. Focus a lot on polysulfate, which is what I'm the product lead for at ICL. But I want to give a quick, and Courtney and I are going to kind of go back and forth. So I'll cover the ICL introduction, and then we're going to look at how to identify sulfur deficiencies, specifically in Canadian crops, removal and replenishment strategies, the different types of sulfur sources that we see in the marketplace. There are a lot of them out there, so we're going to kind of break down the benefits and features of different, common sulfur sources. Courtney has some new and exciting research summary that she's going to go over. And then we're going to talk about some innovation and just market fits and what we see moving forward in the sulfur and ICL marketplace. And then we'll end with some Q&A. So without further ado, Courtney, do you want to advance to the next slide? One of the things that we do hear often is I've heard of ICL, but I'm not exactly sure what ICL or who ICL is. And ICL is a company that's been around for over 100 years now, in the very diverse company. It's in multiple market spaces. Currently has a market cap of around $7 billion. So it is not small by any means, and it is very diverse. You can see the numbers at the top here. There's literally hundreds of products and hundreds of agronomists and a lot of production locations. And then we're very focused on R&D. So we do have 4 R&D centers. This is all over the world. So very diverse company. We really look at it as breaking up into 4 different business units. And so industrial products would be one of them. Mostly bromine solutions that we see. And bromine, about 50% of the world's bromine is mined in and around the Dead Sea in Israel. And so bromine is used mostly in fire retardants, whether it be in clothing or consumer goods, electronics. Very, very important type of industry to be in. Our potash division is based primarily in the Dead Sea, where we use evaporation ponds to create our potash. Produce approximately 4 million tons of potash per year. That's distributed globally. To put that into perspective, we're not as big, obviously, as like the Canadian or the Russian producers, but we do account for about 6 to 7% of the global supply of potash each year. So pretty significant. Phosphate Solutions division is, fairly diverse as well. Think triple superphosphate, but then also we have a pretty big footprint in the industrial and food applications, and even looking at batteries too. So our Phosphate Solutions is diverse in itself and provides a lot of good for products that you probably don't realize that is made by ICL. And then what Courtney and I are in is what we call the Growing Solutions, and that's really a very ag-focused division of ICL. We do have a specialty fertilizer line, which is water solubles, that's used in many starter fertilizers. We've got a biological line now, and then really polysulfate in its derivative products, which we're going to talk about primarily today. So it is a very diverse company. It's been around a long time, and it's just a little bit of background there. So moving forward, what we're here to talk about today is what we like to call the sulfur challenge. We know that there's a problem out there, and a lot of times you'll hear that the sulfur is the fourth macronutrient behind nitrogen, potash, and phosphate fertilizers. But what we're seeing is with new genetics, higher yields being taken off each year, sulfur is really moving into that fourth place when you talk about nutrients. And what we're seeing, not only in Western Canada, but throughout the US and throughout the world, is our soils are becoming more and more deficient in the sulfur nutrient. A lot of reasons for that. We do have, through the Clean Air Acts, reduced atmospheric sulfur. So that definitely plays a role. We don't get a lot of free sulfur like we may have received 20 years ago, which is a good thing. And then also with like I said, with the new genetics and the higher yields that we're getting on our acreage, there is higher removal rates of sulfur. And so canola, potatoes, alfalfa, as we get and develop that and the yields increase, the need for sulfur increases too. I once had a manager that explained it fairly simply. He said, modern day genetics, whether it's canola, corn, potatoes, alfalfa, wheat, are kind of like teenage boys. They just need a lot of fuel to keep going. And so we're seeing with that really some really good responses to sulfur, but also just the need to apply it into your soil fertility programs. So at this point, I think I'm going to pass it over to Courtney and to talk about some specifics, but first we do have a poll question. And there's not a right or wrong answer here. It's just more informational than anything else. So if you can take your cursor and select one of the answers there, and the question is simply, do you consider sulfur when planning your fertility programs for next season? We do get a variety of answers here. And again, it's just more informational and kind of interesting to look at. And so if you got a second, please vote on how you consider sulfur in fertility programs.
For sure. And I'll pull over the poll screen here and we can see kind of as some numbers come in. So we already got lots of answers, which is great, but we'll give it a few more seconds here. Alrighty, so yeah, no, this was great. It's great always to kind of get a sense of where people are at, and agriculture practices differ by area. You can drive like 2-3 hours and it's a whole different ball game. So this is really great. I appreciate everyone participating, and we'll continue on here. So the first panel question we wanted to discuss today was reviewing some of the common signs of sulfur deficiency and talking about some more specifics on how and when we want to apply sulfur fertilizers. So first of all, fertility is not kind of just your nitrogen and phosphorus. There's lots of other nutrients that in balance together are going to create the conditions for your most productive crop as possible. So today we're focusing on sulfur, which is vital for the formation of amino acids and proteins, and very important in photosynthesis, which directly relates to your productivity of the plant. We also have other key nutrients of magnesium, potassium, and calcium that together in balance also contribute to your plant's productivity. Looking for signs of sulfur deficiency in the field, it can be a little tricky. There's a lot of stuff out there to scout for. But early in season, we have examples of canola up here, but these symptoms would translate across other crops as well. So early in season, you would see pale or yellowing on the new growth, potentially some delayed maturity or cupped leaves. Later in the season, you would see patchy stands, thin plants, poor seed fill, and into maturity, you would see not as many seeds in your pods, extended flowering, and just not a nice, healthy looking plant. And when we're thinking of for our stewardship, another thing we need to think of is placing the fertilizer at the right time. So sulfur is most used by the plant in the early rapid growth stages of your plant. So not just at that early seedling stage when you're seeding or a couple weeks after it emerges, but really into kind of those later stages as well. So with canola, those stages would be between your seedling to bolting stage. With alfalfa, that is your green up to bud. With wheat, that is your seedling to tillering. So again, not just like right after you seed, but kind of into that extended period up to kind of that reproductive stage of the plant. Other factors to consider when you're thinking of sulfur availability includes your soil type. So sandy soils with lower organic matter are more prone to sulfur deficiency, as sulfur is a very leachable nutrient. Also, if you're having heavy rainfalls, this would also leach the sulfate as well, and unless it's held in more of your higher clay organic or higher organic matter soils. And also there's high variability. As we discussed some of the symptoms you saw in the previous slide, you may not see those symptoms widespread across your whole field. You might see certain patches, you might see certain areas that have it, but it won't necessarily be widespread throughout your field. So yeah, sometimes narrowing in on identifying the deficiency is kind of tricky. So our next question is discussing what do our 2025 nutrient removal trends tell us about what we need for the next season? So in 2023, the crop nutrient uptake and removal guidelines were updated for Western Canada. So for our heavy sulfur using crops like canola, every year that crop for an average yielding crop is going to be removing about 10 pounds per acre. Wheat, pea, and barley are still, although lower, are going to be removing between 6 and 5 pounds per acre. So your crop is always taking sulfur off. Also, the government of Saskatchewan have posted nutrient removal guidelines as well. So when we're looking at alfalfa is going to be removing about 27 to 33 pounds per acre per year, and potatoes between 16 and 20. So again, the crop is thirsty for sulfur, and when we're thinking of planning for our next season, we got to consider this in the previous crop, what the previous crop took off, but also what is our future crop going to take off. So kind of bring this all together, all this information together. When we're thinking sulfur replenishment for 2026, there's lots of things to consider. So one thing that is tricky is that because these deficiency symptoms can be spotty, also our soil tests aren't 100% reliable. The Canola Council recommends to apply at least 10 to 20 pounds per acre of sulfur almost regardless. And also, the other thing we need to consider is where this fertilizer is going to be placing. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But generally, if we can place the fertilizer as close to the seed or seedling as possible, it's going to be ready for that plant to take it up and use it as efficiently as possible. When we're thinking about fertilizing recommendations, there's kind of a couple of things we pull together before we start making our fertilizer recommendations. So first of all, we consider our previous crop symptoms, and then also consider our crop need for the next season. So are you planting a canola or a high sulfur use crop, or have you planted one last year? That all comes into the equation. Also, there's other tools such as in-season plant analysis and sensor monitoring for color and biomass that also can help us paint a clear picture of what is happening in your field. So with all this information, what options do we have? And that's what we'll discuss further here now. Bring in the trumpets.
Yeah, thank you, Courtney. And so I'm here to talk about polysulfate. And so a little bit of background on what polysulfate is. If you go to the next slide here, we'll do a little geology overview. And so if you look at the picture on the top right, it's a picture of the United Kingdom. And where that star is that's our Bulby mine. And that's right on the North Sea. In the UK. So when we mine polysulfate, think of it, I think we're most familiar with potash mining. There's a shaft, there's a miner, you bring ore to the surface. That's the same way that we mine polysulfate. As you can see, this mine has been open for many, many years. Up until fairly recently, it was a potash mine, so it was Cleveland Potash. And as you can see that there's different stratospheres of ore beds, and potash is mined approximately 1,100 meters below the surface of the earth. But in 2016, we shut the potash operation down and transferred and focused on polysulfate. We currently mine approximately 1 million tons per year of polysulfate and distribute it around the world. One thing to note here is polyhalite is the natural mineral. We market it as polysulfate. And so it's a mineral that is, again, 1,250 feet, goes down to 1,400 meters, down to 1,400 meters where the ore bed is. And we kind of follow that ore bed with our miners. And there's a picture of the miner right underneath the picture of the UK. Couple of unique properties is one, the ore to product ratio for polysulfate is approximately 1:1, and that is unique in the fertilizer industry. You think about MOP, that's depending on the quality of the mine, about a 1:2 ore to product ratio. If you're familiar with like K-Mag or Trio, we're probably looking more like a 1:3 product to ore ratio. That means for every 3 tons of ore that we bring up, we get 1 product ton. Polysulfate is a 1:1 ore to product ratio, which gives us a lot of efficiencies in the mining process. And one of the big ones that we like to talk about is it has the lowest carbon footprint out of any commercially traded fertilizer in the marketplace today. So as carbon becomes more of a keynote in agriculture, polysulfate is a very, very, very low carbon footprint fertilizer. When we think of it, even though it is, over 225 million years old, the ore bed it's a pretty new dry fertilizer in the market. Potash has been around for many, many years. DAP has been around for many years. Urea has been around for a long time. Polysulfate's really been in the marketplace for 10 years right now. So when you look at a dry fertilizer, it is a new fertilizer in the market. We don't get a lot of new dry fertilizers, but polysulfate's definitely one of them. And really in the North American market, it's only been promoted for right around 5 years. So kind of a unique product that we have. We're excited about the growth that we've seen and the growth that's yet to come. But this gives a little bit of an overview on how we mine it. Obviously, it's produced in the UK. We bring it over in vessels, and we can take it through the St. Lawrence. We can go in through New Orleans. We can drop it into ocean warehouses, and that's kind of how we distribute it in the North American market. So next slide. And we're open for questions at the end. There's no test, but if you have any follow-up questions, let's talk about it then. So polyhalite or polysulfate is 4 essential plant macro or nutrients in a single fertilizer. There is some trace minerals in there since it is a natural ore. We don't claim it on our analysis, but since it's a natural occurring ore, there's a little bit of boron, a little bit of zinc. It's not enough to claim on a label, and frankly, as you follow the ore bed, it does vary a little bit. So, but just be aware that there are some trace elements in the fertilizer. But we do claim sulfur, potassium, calcium, and magnesium in polysulfate. All of them are available in the sulfate form, so they're readily available to fill your plant's needs. Couple of highlights here that we really focus on. So low salt index, low chloride, so that correlates to seed safety. SOP would be another product that's similar to this. K-Mag Trio would be a product that's similar to that with the low salt, low chloride properties of polysulfate. Polysulfate has a neutral pH, so it does not acidify your soil. Season-long availability, so we've got a study here I'll show in just a little bit on how it breaks down over the course of the growing season. And then again, it has a low carbon footprint just because of the low 1-to-1 ore to product ratio. There's no chemical processing. It's simply crushed, screened, and shipped. And again, it's polyhalite, and we market it as polysulfate. So next slide. So a little bit more into the analysis of polysulfate. There's 4 nutrients, as we just said. Sulfur, we're talking about sulfur here. So we're going to lead with the sulfur, but sulfur is right around a little over 19%. Potassium is 14%. Magnesium is 3.6%, and calcium is 12.2%. All of them available in the sulfate form. All of them available to the crops in the growing season, which is important key to remember here. Next slide. So I'm going to take a little bit of time right now and kind of do a little bit more of a deep dive throughout the North American market, specifically Western Canada. There's a lot of products that you can use to address sulfur issues. The most common ones that we see are ammonium sulfate, SOP, elemental sulfur, and then now with polysulfate, it's the newest and next product that we like to look at. And it's not just about the source. There's also timing, there's rate, and there's place that we have to consider. So that really gets into the 4R nutrient stewardship. So let's take a quick overview of the 4 R's. Again, right source, right rate, right time, and right place. We're all familiar with that. We've heard it a lot. But what we want to challenge is, what is the right source? What is the right rate? How can you time your sulfur applications to meet the growing needs of your crops? And then where is it? What's the right place? Is it safe for your seed to put it in furrow? You need to broadcast it. How do you apply a sulfur source? And so it's just rethinking the source, not just about rate, not just about timing. It's about sustainability, smarter recommendations, and ultimately profitability on higher yields. And so the next slide, this slide to me is probably best describes the value of polysulfate. It is a study done by the University of Nottingham. So UK, Nottingham, we've heard of Nottingham before. But what they looked at was, what are the release rates with polysulfate versus an ammonium sulfate, an SOP, a kieserite, We don't have elemental here. Elemental, you would see a flat line essentially starting at day 0 and just gradually extend out into the future. We'll talk a little bit more about that just briefly, but this is a really interesting study. If you look at the natural sulfur uptake of most crops, it really gets close to matching the release rate of polysulfate. And so they did this study, and it shows that sulfur in polysulfate is released over a 50-day period. We call it gradual dissolution on how it breaks down in the soil, and that really matches the needs of your crop, which is really unique in ag.
Yeah, and it supports the sulfur demands during that early rapid growth period.
Exactly. Yep. Good point. And so like half of it is released within like the first 10 days. And then you do have a tail that's released from day 10 to day 50. So that is you've seen some really good results with sulfur, specifically with polysulfate. And so just a high level of comparing sulfur sources. And so we decided to look at polysulfate and comparing it to SOP, ammonium sulfate, and then elemental sulfur. And so as you saw from the last graph, the release profile on polysulfate is gradual and sustained. SOP is rapid. Ammonium sulfate is also fast. Both are prone to leaching. And elemental sulfur, depending on a lot of different factors, soil temperature, moisture, is a slow release. It can be months, but it can be years. And so what we hear from a lot of farmers is, budgets are tight. I want the nutrients that I buy today to be available fully for the growing season that I'm about to grow my crop in. And polysulfate is a great fertilizer to match that requirement of farmers. So when you look at salt index, polysulfate's low, so it's seed safety. You can plant it in furrow right by the seed. There's not much risk at all to germination. Well, actually, Courtney will show a study that shows that the germination rates when using polysulfate compared to other fertilizers is quite high. Chloride content, very low. SOP is a very low chloride. Elemental sulfur as well. Ammonium sulfate high. There's 4 nutrients in polysulfate. Elemental being just sulfur, but low leaching risk due to the dissolution and how it breaks down in the soil. So when it comes to crop and soil safety, we give polysulfate a green check as excellent multi-nutrient with many benefits. SOP is good. It's short-lived, along with elemental is fine, but that breaks down over a significant period of time. Ammonium sulfate, depending on your crop type, can present some higher overall risks. Albeit ammonium sulfate right now is probably the #1 sulfur source in the world, but it's not a perfect fertilizer, and we feel like polysulfate matches up very well against all of these fertilizers. So with that being said, Courtney, you want to expand a little bit more on protecting seed and stand count?
For sure. And we'll focus a little bit more on the low salt content of polysulfate here. And I got a little bit of data to show you guys, which being a scientist, that's right up my alley. So one thing here to keep in mind is that polysulfate is a mineral. It's not a mixture that we've crushed up and put together. It's not a mixture of salts. It's a mineral that we have crushed up a little bit, and you can apply this. So it's one single complex crystal. And when we're talking about salt index, polysulfate checks a lot of boxes because it has a low salt index. It's gentler on the seedlings, safer for emergence, especially you think more of your sensitive type crops. With safer emergence, we also have stronger stand counts, more uniform growth. The more uniform and stronger stance has other agronomic benefits to us as well, from protecting against pests, better weed management, lots of things there. So some not direct benefits there, but that's always what we're aiming to build, is like a strong uniform stand. And then as you have a healthy seedling, you're developing deeper roots, a healthier plant early on, giving it the best start possible. And then we also have the potential in some circumstances to lower seeding rates, which is always something we're looking at to do. And with all of this together, we can maximize higher yields with a better stand, healthier plants, creating a higher potential for yield and improved ROI. So we have some great photos here showing a picture is 1,000 words, right? So it's demonstrating the seed safety of polysulfate. So we have various crops here growing right next to or touching the polysulfate granule here. And you see lots of different crop species, from cereals, the pulses, corn, barley, and you'll see also too all of these root hairs here. So there's no burning of the root hairs or the root tips, just really happy seedlings. And the other benefit of this is because you can place it so close to the seed, it's available. So your plant can take it up right there and then, and it can be available to the plant. It's not looking for it or scavenging it throughout the soil profile. So this is some results from a seed safety study on canola seed at stand counts at 14 days after emergence in Manitoba. And what we see here is that polysulfate increased canola stands by over 10% as compared to the control. So having that nutrient package close to the seed boosted the canola stand and as compared to the control. But we also see some, higher salt content fertilizers may also be damaging a little bit of the seedling stand as well. And now just moving into how this translates into other research trials we've done throughout North America, and also focusing a little bit more on the yield story as well. So right here we have a great photo showing how sulfur deficiency symptoms were observed with just applying with KCl, but once polysulfate was added to the crop, we saw a much more uniform stand. So that's where you can see on your left-hand side, there's a thinner stand, not as uniform crop staging, just not looking as happy. But then directly on your right with polysulfate, we see a much thicker stand. Crop staging is all within a closer stage as well. We just had a question here asking what was the control test. I'm guessing with the last slide, that was grower standard. So grower standard practice in the area. So moving on, so this is the yield data from the same trial that we had when we were discussing crop stand establishment earlier on. So what we see when we looked at the yield of the same trial is that the increased plant stand translated into yield benefits here, where as compared to the control, we saw a 25% increase in yield over the control. So really great results here. And a little bit more data and some other crops. So we also have alfalfa here as well, which is another high sulfur demand crop. This graph outlines the total dry matter yield of the alfalfa crop over 4 cuts. So over the all 4 cuts, we saw a yield increase of 6.8%. And then also narrowing in on the fourth cut, we saw the greatest benefit, where there was a 25% yield bump in the 4th cut. So that sustained release of the polysulfate is feeding the crop later in the season, making a more productive crop, as maybe some of those more early season fertilizers have already run out. Through the second to fourth cut, we also had quality analysis done. It's not on the slide right now, but we increased crude protein, increased crude protein, reduce ADF and NDF, which is our couple of our forage quality indicators there as well. So both yield and quality. And then also we have a trial on oat, which we don't typically think of as sulfur immediately, as it's not a high sulfur demand crop. But in a low sulfur demand crop where we added polysulfate, we also saw a yield increase in our polysulfate treatments here as well. So even though it's not the typical one you think of sulfur, still seeing a yield benefit here. And then moving into innovation and market fit. On to you, Dan.
Excellent. So we can just go to the next slide here. I want to give a little bit of background on what we do with polysulfate. And so if you remember the mining process, we mine it underground, crush it, screen it, ship it. In the natural mining process, there is undersized, so standard grade material. And what we'll do with that standard grade is we'll make polysulfate premium, and that's a uniform prill. We use that in Western Canada specifically for the use in air seeders. And so when I say uniform prill, think the shape of urea, MAP, DAP. Our granular grade looks a lot like potash, and so those are the two different grades that we have on polysulfate. But in Western Canada specifically, we ship polysulfate premium because it's an ideal fertilizer for air seeders in the air seeder market. Other things we can do with the standard grade that we have, the byproduct of producing polysulfate, is we have a product called ICL PK Plus. So potassium and phosphate along with the benefits of polysulfate. So it's a 5-in-1 nutrient. We granulate this, so it is a uniform prill. Looks very similar to polysulfate premium and other fertilizers like, again, urea, MAP, and DAP. But there's 5 nutrients in one. What we do is we use a phosphate rock base, and to that we add polysulfate. We add sulfuric acid. We add phosphoric acid. If we want to increase the K levels, we can add SOP or MOP to that. And come up with a 5-in-1 nutrient fertilizer that best fits the cropping season. So this is made through a granulation plant in Amsterdam in Germany, and we ship that also into the North American market. There's also a lot of, which is nice with ICL, if you remember all of the research, the R&D centers, all of the agronomists that work at ICL, we have a pretty good new product development formation in our company. So we're looking at a lot of different things. We're trying to innovate. Can we suspend polysulfate in a liquid form? Can we add trace minerals? Can we add boron? Can we add zinc to that product? We're always looking to expand and grow polysulfate in the marketplace. But from a base, polysulfate has been very, very good fit for cropping needs. So next slide, and I want to wrap up my part by just talking about how we've adapted to regional needs. So we've provided agronomic solutions tailored to fit the demands of the grower, which is the development of the premium grade, the development of PK Plus. We can put it through air seeders. We can adjust the analysis on PK Plus to fit unique needs of different geographies throughout the world. The last two bullet points I don't want to breeze over because I think this is important for everyone to know. As we've been growing this market, and so earlier I said the first polysulfate came into the North American market right around that 2020 year. As we've been growing it, we're also expanding our logistical assets to meet that demand. So it comes to rail cars, it comes to additional warehousing, it comes to transload locations. All of that is growing as we are growing the product line. And then our team, specifically growing solutions in North America, is also growing. So if you go back to 2020, our team probably had right in that 10 to 15 employees in North America. And now in 2025, we are pushing right at 100. So the commitment we've gotten from ICL Global to grow North America and to invest in the needs of providing the best quality products at the right time, at a fair price, has been fully supportive from the company. So from Courtney and I perspective, that is what we look for in a company, and ICL has met the needs that we have, that our customers are demanding. So we're here for the long run, and we're growing to meet the increased needs of our customers. So next slide.
For sure. And just some closing remarks from my side is agronomically, polysulfate is a really exciting product. It's a sulfur solution for farmers that is not just a sulfur solution, but it's a 4-nutrient solution. And sulfur deficiency is widespread throughout the prairies. Up to 40% of the crops are experiencing this. So it's exciting to be able to bring this solution to farmers. And hopefully with, maximizing, polysulfate has a lot of benefits from great blendability, flexibility for flexible different types of applications. It can be seed placed, it can be side banded, it can be broadcast in the fall. Lots of different options there that we can work with what your setup is on farm to hopefully maximize your yield and profit. The sustained release feeds your crop not just in the seedling stage, but in that rapid growth and throughout into the season. And yeah, it's not just bringing the sulfur, but also the other key nutrients that will help maximize your productivity. So that is all we have for you guys today. I've seen a few questions pop up in the chat. So I see one here, but if you have any questions, we have both of our emails up here. And we also have our website there. If you search ICL Canada, it'll bring it up really quick too in a Google search. And some of the studies we referenced early on about nutrient uptake by different crops, we shared in the chat as well. So there's a couple of resources for you there, but always feel free to give, contact us, and excited to talk with you more.
Great. Well, thank you both very much for a great presentation. And I'd like to thank, of course, ICL for sponsoring today's webinar, making it possible. So we can dive into a few audience questions here, and then we'll bring up the QR code for those CCA credits as well. All right, so let's see here. The first question here is, lots of farmers are floating AMS on in the fall. Could you float polysulfate in the fall since it has low release?
Yes. Yeah, it's a great product where you have flexible application. We see people applying it in the fall. A lot of our US farmers, this is the common practice of floating it in the fall. So that is an option for sure.
Perfect.
Yeah, we see significant fall application, especially in the Corn Belt in the US. We do have a marketing tagline that I like. It says fall applied, spring approved. So definitely expanded application window. Fall is a good time to put down polysulfate.
Great. All right, we're seeing a few more come in here. Try and get a few in. Do you feel there's a need to increase the rate if we're going to float it on versus banding?
There's a couple factors to consider there, what type of conditions you're floating it into. So if it's a drier conditions into the fall and you're about to freeze up, like right before freeze up. I'm thinking up here in Canada, I'm in Saskatoon, like our ground's pretty much like almost frozen. So you're going to get less loss over the winter. So if you're starting your fall fertilizing earlier, you might want to go towards your higher window of a rate. Kind of depends on when you're getting out in the field. Yeah, there's some flexibility there. Dan, I don't know if you have additional from the US, for example, since that's more of the common practice in the US.
Yeah, most in the US is floated on. We don't do a lot of banding, but usually generally speaking, I believe a floating rate would be a little bit higher than banding. So it's probably do a trial on it. But generally speaking, we tend to see more product applied per acre in a floating application environment.
Next one here. So we spoke a lot about the sulfur. What about the other nutrients in polysulfate? Will we see benefits from calcium, magnesium? Where, when do you suspect we see that benefit?
Do you have time for another webinar? Yeah, we definitely zeroed in on the sulfur message today. But in other crops such as like potatoes, the magnesium component is really important for the quality of your potatoes at the end of the season. Calcium also is really important from soil chemistry standpoint. And we can get really deep into soil chemistry on that one, but when working with your soil structure, calcium is a key component there. And yeah, like I said, lots of benefits there. And that's another part that makes polysulfate really exciting is that we're seeing not just, feeding the sulfur feeds your crop and makes it more productive. There's all these other benefits around the whole nutrient package. So let's talk more is what I'll say there.
Yeah, that's great. All right, another one, and then this is actually related to Saskatchewan. So it's spring floating in Saskatchewan, okay. Will the roots access it, or does it need to be fall applied to give it time to get into the root zone? This is a bit of a follow-up to an earlier question.
I think either is good. So if you broadcast it, you're going to be cutting into the field anyway. Yeah, it's always a balance. It's a great product because you have the flexibility. When we're thinking of the 4Rs, right place, the quickest place is going to be right next to your seed. So if you have banding, that's where you're going to have your quickest interaction with it when you're broadcasting. Not it's not like right there as it was placed. But I think with the fact you're going to be broadcasting it and then cutting into the field, you're still going to be good there.
Good. A couple questions in here around rates. So I know you'll kind of give your best answer here, but one is, what do you suggest as a rate for broadcasting in the fall? Another one is kind of what annual rate are we talking about in pounds per acre?
This is a tough one as coming from the sulfur, there's so many variables. Our canola study there is 100 pounds per acre, I think, just off the top of my head. And we do kind of have base rates as well, kind of depending on crop and crop use. But I think it's really important to think of your soil. What type of soil are you? Dark brown, you sandier, higher clay. There's all those things to consider. And then on top of it, what your crop is going to be for the year. So, Dad, I'm not sure if we can just throw out a general rate. A lot of times we kind of with commodity crops in the West, yeah, like 200, like 100 to 200, and then kind of go from there. From a crop safety standpoint, some crops we're looking at applying 500 pounds per acre. There's not a concern from a crop safety with increasing your rate. It's really about meeting the nutrient needs of your crop. So,
yeah, I think that's well said, Courtney. It really depends on the crop. Typically, what we see is 100 to 200 pounds per acre, depending on your soil conditions, depending on the crop. Potatoes, you're going to see a significantly higher application rate than that. But generally speaking, we'll see anywhere from 100 pounds to 200 pounds per acre, again, depending on what crop and what soil conditions that you have.
And I just wanted to let all the attendees know there are some kind of very specific questions in here. I'm going to make sure that Courtney and Dan have your contact information and they can reach out to you for a more precise answer on that and have a greater discussion there. So there's a few of these that I will leave to them to follow up on. But we've got a couple more here and then we'll start to close. What is the actual salt index and pH of polysulfate, and how much might it vary load to load?
Dad?
Yeah, I'm looking at my brochure here right now.
Yeah,
that's a technical one for you. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
man, no,
right?
I'm just like
Thanks. The chlorides are right at about 3%. And so what was the other, the pH? It is a pH neutral product. So specific pH, I don't have that information on it. It just says pH neutral.
pH neutral.
So that would be what, 6.5%, 7%. kind of in that range, but I've got pH neutral, and then chlorides would be right around 3%. It varies very, very just minuscule. But the guarantees are 3% or lower, and then a pH neutral.
All right, so 2 more here, and then we'll turn it over to the QR code, and the rest of the questions I'll leave with Courtney and Dan. Since sulfur is a mobile nutrient, how can those of us in the sandy soils best manage it?
For sure. So yeah, that's definitely more of a challenge in your sandier soils with lower organic matter, is you don't have that soil structure to kind of hold onto your nutrients to when you need it. That's a great thing about polysulfate, is that we see that gradual release even in the sandier soils. And yeah, it's a great solution for our farmers there.
And how can crop rotation help in managing that sulfur availability?
For sure. Not as direct as like when you think of like pulses and nitrogen, for example, where there's a high correlation. But generally, when you're considering your rotations, what are you planting last year? What are you planting this year? Did you plant a high sulfur demand crop last year? You're planting a high sulfur demand crop this year. You're going to be depleting those, like regardless of the crop you're planting, you're depleting what's already there. But especially when you're thinking of a high sulfur rotation right after another, you want to keep in mind what those high, like, up to 10 pounds per acre is coming off, especially with those higher. Another thing with polysulfate, we have not just the sulfur component, but we have the full nutrient package. So, and with the gradual release, we're feeding not only the plant, but the soil microbiome throughout the season as well. So a healthier soil is going to be a happier soil, and that's going to help your crop remain productive throughout the year as well.
Perfect. Thank you both. Are there any other questions that you see have come through that I've missed that you'd like to run through live?
No, I think if nothing more from my side, I think if definitely send those more specific questions our way, and we can definitely provide a little bit more information on some of those more specifics.
Perfect. All right. So again, thank you everybody for joining us. Before we wrap up today, here is your chance to collect one CCA CEU in nutrient management. I believe my colleague's going to share the QR code there on the screen. So to collect the credit for this webinar, you can open your CCA app on your phone, click scan course code, and hold your phone up to the monitor, of course, so the camera can hover over the QR code. And if you're able to do this, your CEUs will be submitted immediately. If this does not work for you, please email your first name, last name, and CCA number to webinars@annexbusinessmedia.com, and we'll submit the credit for you. A follow-up email will be sent out within 24 hours that holds the recording of the webinar and our email address for any feedback, questions, or to submit your CCA information. And so thank you again, Courtney and Dan, and thank you everybody for taking the time to join us today. And don't forget to visit topcropmanager.com to stay connected. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.